It seems like, to tell you the truth, well, first of all, hi, everyone. Good evening. I'm Debbie Schwartz, founder of Road to College, and I'm here tonight with Kat Del Grosso from College Ave Student Loans, and we're going to be talking about the financial aid process. For some reason, I think my setup got a little messed up, so people are coming in unmuted. So let me just double check that for a second. And if you are by chance coming in unmuted, if you can mute yourself, that would be great. Hold on. Oh, it does say mute upon entry, so I don't know what happened. Okay. So tonight we've been actually talking about financial aid for probably about a month now, right, Kat? This is the third presentation we've done.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But we know that, people still have questions, and I actually would love to know if most of the people on tonight are families with seniors, or if there's anybody with a family with a junior, because if you're here with a junior, it's a great time to learn. You can kind of and I'm not hopefully making fun of any of the senior parents. I've been through it too. It's a stressful time right now. So, if you're a family of a junior, you can kind of look ahead and say, is there any way I can avoid what some of the stress that other families are going through now? And the way you can avoid it, if you're that family with a junior, is to start learning now about the process. So let me put on chat. I'd love to see who is here. Here you go. Great. Okay. So some junior parents, great, and lots of senior parents, which makes sense. And if you're a parent with a senior, have you started any of the financial aid paperwork? Have you done FAFSA? Do you have to do CSS profile? Again, just to give us a sense of who's out there and kind of what you're working on these days. Okay, so while you let us know in chat, we're gonna get started. And sorry, I don't know why this mute is not working. I'll have to just keep my eye on it. Here it is. Okay. So we're so happy to have Kat here from College Ave Student Loans. Kat has a great background in financial aid, which she'll tell you about in a second. But we've worked with College Ave now for several years, and they are a really good partner that Road to College appreciates working with. They sponsor a lot of these educational programs like tonight. So they are very invested in making sure that families understand the process. They do offer student loans. They have a very good product if you need to look into student loans at that point in the process. But again, they're very invested in making sure that families understand the financial aspect of paying for college, understand financial aid, so that by the time you may need to be looking into student loans, again, you're educated on what you might need and how the student loan process works. So Kat, I'd love for you to tell people your background, and I'm sure they will be impressed and know that we are in good hands tonight since you have a ton of good knowledge.
Okay, thanks, Debbie. So I am at College Ave Student Loans now. I've been here about 4 years, and we're out of Wilmington, Delaware. And but prior to that, I worked at the College Board for 7 years, and I used to work specifically with the CSS profile application there, and I worked closely with the financial aid offices who basically from colleges and universities that use the CSS profile. So I'm very, very familiar with the form. And then prior to that, I had worked in student loans for actually over a decade previously as well. And I got my start at the University of Rochester in upstate New York, and worked in financial aid there with the CSS profile before it was even called the CSS profile back in the early 90s. And I also worked at Syracuse University, where we also use the CSS profile and IDOC, which is basically a service from the College Board where you can collect tax returns and things like that from the families in a convenient way for them. So I have sort of worked on all sides of the desk related to financial aid, and I've been in the field for 29 years, going on 30. So,
Oh, but you look so young.
well, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I keep trying, whatever products I can buy, I guess. Yeah. So, Debbie, shall I go ahead and kick it off?
Let's kick it off. I'm going to keep track of questions, and I'll interrupt, if there's something that's relevant to what you're talking about. And if not, at the end, we will scroll back through and answer questions.
Okay, perfect. Yes, Debbie's very good at moderating and facilitating this conversation. So we will be sure to get to as many questions as we can, if not all of them. So what I'm going to talk to you tonight about is, this is, really about the college financial aid process. I noticed that in the chat that there were a lot of families related to either parents and families related to the senior class. I saw a lot of juniors coming up there. I didn't see anything other than that, but then again, I haven't been watching chat for a couple minutes. So nonetheless, we've got a mix of folks on here, so we'll be sure to help all of you on this call tonight for sure. So the main things to talk about are as follows. I'm going to go over some financial aid misconceptions out there, things that I think families sometimes might say to me or have said to me over the years. I still help families one-on-one, just periodically, just lots of friends with kids going to college now. So I'm very up to date on like lots of misconceptions and lots of thoughts that you're going through. So I'm definitely in the weeds with you guys on this stuff. We'll talk about applying for financial aid and a little bit of advice as it relates to the forms as well. So these are some of the main misconceptions I think families from my time over the years have said to me. And so we'll go through some of these, but things like, what you see on the screen there, I'm going to go through actually individually on the next couple of slides. So let's start with, we won't qualify for financial aid. So I think sometimes families think that they may just not even bother doing the FAFSA because they don't think they're going to even qualify. But the FAFSA, which stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid, is really the kickoff form that you need in order to have the colleges and universities figure out, like, are you eligible for anything at all? And so I can tell you right now that you would be eligible for, at minimum, the federal student loans that are available to you. There are some need-based and non-need-based programs that may tie into you applying on that FAFSA. And some schools even look at the FAFSA to be considered for merit aid. And merit aid basically means like things like scholarships that are based on academic talent and perhaps other types of talents and great, things that are academic based or talent based, basically. So don't skip the FAFSA, even if you don't think you'll qualify. It doesn't take all that long to do the FAFSA. I realize that filling out a form is probably not the most exciting thing to do on a weeknight when you get home from work, or a weekend when you'd rather be doing other things. But it is worth it just to be able to assess what it is you might be eligible for. So, and it's free. So it's no harm, no foul. The second misconception that families sometimes say is, okay, my income is too high. I can't, there's no way I'm going to qualify for anything. We make, fill in the blank amount of money, and we don't think we'll be eligible. But just because your income is too high to qualify for, like, maybe a federal Pell Grant, which is really given to the most needy students and families, that doesn't mean that you wouldn't qualify for some other things, like, for example, money that comes directly from the college or university. So definitely don't count yourself out that you think your income is too high to qualify. Just, fill out the FAFSA, get yourself started into it. And the worst case scenario is you would end up with a minimum of the federal loans, but at least you'll know, and you won't have to guess, gee, I wish I had, filled it out. And then the other misconception on this slide is that our income's too low to qualify. So a lot of families think, well, we're never going to be able to afford college. We're never going to be able to afford the college we want to go, our child to go to. And so there's a sort of the stopgap where families might say, well, forget it, we're not going to move forward. So definitely don't do that. So these are all misconceptions, which basically means that my message to you tonight on these slides, these 2 slides that I have here, are that you really need to just pursue it. And once you're applying for admissions to the colleges and universities that you've selected as kind of like your small pool of colleges to apply to, you definitely should be also applying for financial aid through the FAFSA. So also, this is huge because a lot of families think that they have to only look at the schools that have a lower sticker price, like a 4-year public school or a 2-year public school. And what you really should do is to consider all the schools that match up with your child's interests in terms of, is it a good academic fit for them? Is it a good social fit for them? Not just a financial fit, because you really don't know, having worked at a couple of high-cost private institutions, as I mentioned earlier in my little short bio there, those colleges sometimes have a lot of money to spend in terms of need-based financial aid or academic-based financial scholarships. So you may find that it may be just as affordable for you to go to a private school as it is for a public school. So you just never know. So it's always good to have your selections based on, like I said, academic fit, social fit, and not just financial fit. And then lastly, families have certainly endured a lot of special circumstances over time with job loss, or maybe other things like, during the recession back the last time around in 2008, that certainly caused, I was working in financial aid at the time, actually at Syracuse University, and we certainly saw a lot of job loss at that time. And we worked with families individually. All colleges will work with families individually upon their certain situations. So if you have had a job loss, or let's say during COVID, you had a job loss, and you picked up another job, but it doesn't pay as much, or whatever the circumstances are, don't count yourself out for being able to apply for financial aid, because quite honestly, every college is that they're used to this topic, because there's always ups and downs in terms of the economy, and families, they're very used to working with families who have experienced any kind of income change. So definitely don't count yourself out in this whole process, because like I said, it's a very common thing that the financial aid offices at the schools are used to working with you guys on. So not to worry. So, okay, so Debbie, I'm going to move forward unless you need to present any questions so far.
No, go ahead. I've been answering questions. I mean, and some people are asking the difference between the CSS profile and FAFSA, and I know you have that in there. So we're just going to keep going.
Yep. So here we go. So basically your preparation plan. So some of you on this call are with seniors, some of you juniors, and perhaps we've got some sophomores and beyond on the call now at this point. And so essentially, here's what you need to do. You need to apply for financial aid. You have to fill out the FAFSA, which again is the free application for federal student aid, and therefore it's free. There's no cost. And then you can put up to 10 colleges at a time on that form. And then, so I would just, say put your top 10 on there, and then you can always move out a school and move in a school. So even if you're looking at 11 schools, not to worry, you can put on like your top 10, and then you can always remove one later and put on, that 11th school some other time. And then the CSS profile is a form that is basically administered by the College Board, which is the same company that does the SAT exam, the advanced placement exams, and the PSAT as well, and the National Merit Scholar qualifying tests with the PSAT. So they administer the CSS profile application, but not all colleges will need that. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, but essentially you need to determine, okay, what schools need which form, and you'll need to fill out one or both of those. And again, I'm going to talk a little bit more about those forms in a bit. And then you'll want the student to apply for any merit and private scholarships, which may be external from the college itself. Like if you're looking for outside scholarships, it's not just always through the college itself. You might actually be able to obtain some money outside of that. Then make financial plans for each college by using their net price calculator. So every college that administers any kind of federal financial aid program, which is actually through Title IV, through the Department of Education, they're required to have what's called a net price calculator on their website. And that basically can be found either under the usual, well, it's typically always under the financial aid part of the website, but you sometimes also find it linked under the admissions side of the website, and it might also be under both. So, but either way, they're required to have it. So somewhere in there, you can go in and you can plug in some data about your income and your assets. And then what will happen is it will actually produce in a relatively short amount of time, what would be an estimated net price in terms of you affording that college. And it'll be an estimate. So it could be like a range. It depends on what product they're using for the net price calculator. They might have built it themselves. They might have used a third-party vendor to use it, to create the net price calculator, but it'll be basically a range or, more or less, an estimate of what it might cost you based on your income and assets and everything. So that I would recommend doing. That is also free. You can go in and play around with that. For those of you on the call who are seniors, but you have you're applying early decision or early action somewhere, you're kind of running a little low on time versus, at this point, you should just be doing the applications, the FAFSA and the CSS profile, and whatever else the school needs you to do. If you're doing early decision or early action, because those deadlines tend to be now, like November.
Yeah, sometime, right. Like if it was November 1st, sometimes some of the colleges have the financial aid forms like November 14th. Sometimes I actually have it the same day as the application. So hopefully people are checking.
Yeah. So for those of you on the call who are, like I said, seniors doing early decision or early action, you have the more imminent to-do list versus those of you who are seniors who are applying what we call regular decision, which is really, more like a February type of deadline for your applications. Obviously, this is giving you a little bit more time. And then for those of you who are juniors or younger, you have much more time to. So I'm glad you're all here tonight, and you're all hopefully picking something up out of this conversation.
So Kat, there was a question about, I've been asking people, did they get their EFC? If they did their, FAFSA, do they know what their EFC is now? And somebody asked the question, they did, they know their EFC, and how do they know that now that they have their EFC, that the information they got from the net price calculator is using, something similar to the EFC that they got, that was just generated?
So they hadn't tried the net price calculator? They just want to.
No, they did try the net price calculator, but they don't know that what was generated, what that net cost was that was generated from the calculator is actually using the, close to the EFC estimate that they're now getting from FAFSA.
Yeah, so the EFC from the FAFSA is going to be more accurate to everything, because you're essentially applying for the fall of 23-24 by using the FAFSA that you filled out. It's based, it's the 23-24 application at this point. And the FAFSA is also using 2021 income and current assets as of the day you filed the FAFSA. Same with the CSS profile. So it's based on 2021 income and current day assets. So when you fill out the net price calculator, however, if you're on the website, make sure you're using 2021 income, because that's what's going to be used for the FAFSA and the CSS profile. If you plugged in something else, like your current income, if it changed, then you're going to get something that's going to be off certainly from the EFC, like the numbers that are going into those real applications, like the real thing. Think of the net price calculator as a practice. It's just a practice form to figure out, it's not going to be exact, but it is going to give you at least an estimate, which is really why the Department of Education wanted it to be there. It was actually about, it was a little over a decade ago, they started requiring it in 2011. And they really just wanted transparency to the families to be able to say, okay, well, here's how much it might cost me to go to this private school versus this public school versus this 2-year public school. And so it's great, except that it's not exact. So, take it for what it's worth. It really is more of an estimate practice type of form, as opposed to the FAFSA and the CSS profile, which are the real deal. So they're the ones that are actually going to be used to base your financial aid on. And because they're using 2021 income on those, that's where you definitely could see a differential if you're plugging in some other income like 2022. I hope that helped.
Yes.
Okay. So finding ways to lower costs could be things like looking at a 4-year public school that's in your state. If you're looking at a public 4-year school that's out of state, for example, I went to Penn State. I was from Pennsylvania when I grew up. So for my family, we paid in-state tuition. But if I was living in the state of Delaware and I wanted to go to Penn State, it would have cost me more money because I would have been crossing over state lines. So the in-state public school is a way to make it cheaper for you. But as I mentioned, sometimes the private universities will end up giving you enough money where it actually equates, and you actually might be surprised that it could end up being cheaper at a private school. You just never know. It depends on your situation. Second bullet I covered there. The CSS profile you only would submit to schools that you're really interested in, because it is fee-based. So they charge $25. The College Board charges $25 for one school to fill out the CSS profile. And then they charge an additional $16, $16 for each additional college. So, if you'd applied to 2 schools that need the CSS profile right there, that's $41 and so on. So, 25 plus 16. So, don't go too crazy with, having too many schools that, first of all, it's going to make it harder for you to decide. If the student ends up getting into 20 schools, then all of a sudden you've got a tough decision to make when it comes time for you to make that decision. But also it can cost you money if it happens to be a bunch of schools that require a fee-based form, the CSS profile. I would like to say, though, that they have a lot of fee waivers available for the CSS profile. If your income is less than $100,000, they actually are providing fee waivers to those families as of last year. So if you are in that situation, you'll automatically get fee waivers for all the schools you're applying to. And but if you don't get a fee waiver, I just wanted to caution you that there would be a price tag on that. Let's see, what else should I say about that? Oh, also, there is not a limit. So, remember how I mentioned the FAFSA allows you to put 10 schools on there? The CSS profile doesn't have that kind of limit, so you can just plug in. I think it's a number that you would never reach. It's a high number. So you can put as many on there as you would like. And then also, I would like to mention that not every school, this is a good time to show you the College Board's website for the CSS profile. So it's cssprofile.org. It does go over to this longer URL here, that's cssprofile.collegeboard.org, but either one will get you there. When you're on this site, just a little bit down to the left, you can see this where it says check participating schools and scholarships. and click on Learn More. And that will actually get you to the list of participating schools that need the profile, because only about 275 or 300 schools actually even require it, and there are 6,000 schools in the country. So that is a very small subset of the schools that will actually need this form. And it tends to be a lot of private colleges and universities. They have a lot of money to spend, and that's why they like to get this extra data from this secondary application, because it gives them more information than what the FAFSA provides. So this is what you can do. You can go to this list. You can sort it like, okay, well, I live in Indiana, and I want to see what school, if any of these schools require the CSS profile from me, and I live in Indiana. You can also do a whole search of A to Z, and you can just look for the schools that you're interested in. So you'll look here where it says CSS profile for domestic students. If you are a student on this call who is an international student, or a DACA student, this is your column here. And then for those of you who are within families where there is a divorce separated situation, or perhaps the parent the student lives with has never been married to the biological parent, this is also a column you'll want to be familiar with right here. And that is the CSS profile for non-custodial parents, meaning the other biological or adoptive parent may have to fill out their own application. Like, in other words, not only is the CSS profile required for the parent where the student, who the student lives with, but also the other biological parent or household might have to do a form as well. So let me give you an example. So if I pull in, let me just sort this here. So if I say, okay, well, I'm applying to American University, and they require the CSS profile for domestic students. But if you look over here on the right, you could look at all the ones that say yes for the non-custodial parent as well. American needs that, Amherst needs that, Babson, Bard, and so on down the line. So not only do they need it for the family where the student lives, but they need it for that other biological parent as well. So this is very good for you to look at and see like who needs what. IDOC is something that not all schools will use, but if they do use it, you can take a peek here. As I mentioned earlier, IDOC is basically, excuse me, it stands for Institutional Documentation Service. It basically means that the colleges and universities have used the College Board as a means to collect like any kind of tax returns or W-2s or 1099s. If they want to get in the weeds and ask for that information, they'll use this IDOC service. And that way, if you're applying to a multitude of schools that need those things like taxes, you send it into one place and it disseminates out to multiple schools. So in this example, let's say you apply to Amherst and Babson, which are both in Massachusetts. You fill out, you submit IDOC, and it automatically goes to both of the colleges. Honestly, you really shouldn't worry about IDOC right now, because it's really more further down the line. It would be more like, for most folks, it would happen in the spring or possibly even summer, before you attend the schools, where they need to ask you for that extra information. So right now, really all you need to worry about is, do I need to do the profile? Do I need to do the profile for a non-custodial parent? And do I need, obviously you do need to do the FAFSA. The FAFSA is kind of like the universal form, but the CSS profile is only for this subset of institutions that I'm showing you here. So,
Kat, oops, sorry, if you don't mind, if you want to go back. Somebody had a question, maybe you can just touch on it lightly.
Sure.
What about financial aid for international students?
So yeah, financial aid for international students is sometimes available. A lot of times it'll be limited in nature. Some schools have very generous grant programs or scholarship programs for their international population, and some don't have any aid at all for international students or DACA students. So it just depends. But I think you'll find like over the last, I don't know, probably, 5 to, no, probably the last decade now, time seems to be flying for me. I think colleges and universities have really increased the having the availability of grants and scholarships for international students more so than they ever did, like in the earlier part of my career. And that's really because they want international students. Some schools are really, they're recruiting international students. They want those students to be a part of their community in terms of diversity and inclusion. And so they may also be offering them some funding, but I think it's hard. It's for the most part, they're not getting as much as a domestic student, certainly. So if their need is the same as their neighbor, they may get less than what their neighbor down the street from high school is getting. But at least there are a lot of colleges that offer aid to those students now.
Kat, another question on CSS profile before we leave this page. You talked about the fee waivers. Is the income for the fee waivers, if parents are divorced, whose income is it based on? Is it just based on one parent, both parents combined?
Well, that's a good question. So it's based on whoever is filling out this form here, this column I'm highlighting in blue. So it's the family that the student lives with, and it's, okay, so let me try to clarify that. So let's just say that you're in a situation where I'm the student and I'm applying, I live with my mom, and my mom is remarried. So I have a stepdad. So the mom and the stepdad go on the CSS profile that I've highlighted in blue. And then in addition to that, my biological father, also needs to fill out the CSS profile. I'm highlighting that column in blue. Let's say I am applying to Amherst College and they need it for all of us. The waiver is actually separate. So you could get a waiver as the custodial parent for that first CSS profile that I'm highlighting in blue again here. And then if I'm the non-custodial parent, I can also qualify for a waiver over here. So in other words, they treat it separately. You can both get waivers. It's based on the income on each application. So if it's, again, in my example, I said I'm living with my mom, she's remarried. So it would be based on my mom and my stepdad's information to determine if I get a waiver. And then if my father is applying separately on his own CSS profile, his income would be used to figure out if he gets a waiver as well. So does that make sense? Everybody can qualify for a waiver on their separate forms, but whoever goes on the form as the custodial parent, it's going to be done separately than the non-custodial parents.
And there's a quick question about, because I know this is confusing also for FAFSA, but for CSS profile, who's really filling out the form, parent or student, or both?
Well, I mean, the parents typically fill out the form. I mean, you're both e-signing, so you're electronically signing it. Excuse me. But to be honest with you, the parents tend to fill out the bulk of the form because they're the ones that know all the information about their own income and assets. Whereas, quite frankly, I mean, I worked with a lot of families over the years. Some parents really didn't want the student knowing what their income and assets were. So they were kind of filling out the form on behalf of the student, but the student technically has to, quote unquote, electronically sign it as well. But I would say the parents are pretty much, doing the load. And then sometimes they're doing it in tandem. They're sitting down together and they're student fills out their portion, parents do theirs. And, but usually the parents that kind of do the heavy lifting on it.
So this information that is needed from like the students, accounts and stuff, and obviously a bulk of the information is the parents. So basically there is a section for student information, whether or not the student doesn't have to be the one that fills it out, but it's going to represent them.
Correct, because it's their tax data that's coming in from the 2021 year as well for students who are entering next fall. That is, you guys who are seniors out there. And then their assets. So it'll be based on whatever their bank accounts are. But again, the parents probably have access to that already. So, you know, the parent really could probably fill out the majority of the application, but the student has to sign it electronically either way.
Okay, I think you could go back to the initial slides.
Okay. All right, so let's see here. If you have any kind of special circumstances, please be sure to talk with the financial aid advisors at your schools, because they will, like I said before, they will work with you on the biggest things are like job loss or any kind of medical bills, but it could be a multitude of things like, you know, we're taking care of an elderly grandparent who doesn't live with us, or maybe does live with us, but they need financial assistance towards their assisted living facility that they're living in, or just they live at home, but they need help with their meals. And so we've had to send them $500 a month towards their expenses and things like that. That's a common one, I think, as well. Also K through 12, secondary, elementary, you know, school tuition types of things. That's also another common one that we often saw, where you might be paying out for tuition for your high school or younger kids, you know, to a private institution, private, you know, K-12 school. So anything like that, just make sure that you're talking with the financial aid office to make sure that they take that into account, because keep in mind, they are looking at older data. So they're looking at income from 2021. And if you've had a big change since then, you're going to want to paint that picture. You're going to want to paint over the picture of 2021 on the applications and show them the real picture, because they don't know that. The nice thing about the CSS profile is that it allows you to put that information on there. You actually are given up to a 2,000 character limit to write your story there. So if you do want to share some things, you can, you know, type it out in free form while you're doing the CSS profile application. Unfortunately, the FAFSA does not have the ability to do that. So you would need to communicate your same type of story in another way, either an email or a letter to the schools that only require the FAFSA, because they have no other way of knowing your story. And then also on here is that they're typically they're called the bursar's office, or sometimes they're called the student accounts office. They're basically the people who are sending you the bill. So they typically will offer a monthly payment plan. So it's like, if you want to be, if you know you can afford what's being asked of you, you can afford it over the course of a 9 or 10 month period throughout the school year. And they usually will either charge you they'll charge you a nominal fee, or I don't know, I've probably never seen it over $50, but they'll charge you like a nominal payment fee, and then they'll let you spread it out evenly over the course of 9 or 10 months. Okay, so let's go over some of these things. I'm going to skip this slide because this is really just a summary of the titles of things. But so the first item is, what does the sticker price include? So the sticker price, excuse me, I'm sorry. The sticker price includes 5 different components. So you've got your tuition and fees. Those are billed directly by the school. So that's going to obviously vary. That tends to be it is typically the largest portion of what the cost of attendance or sticker price includes. And then room and board would be your second largest thing, or sometimes your largest chunk. If it's like a public school, their room and board tends to be actually more money than the tuition. But nonetheless, the tuition fees, room and board are the biggest part of the cost of attendance. And if you're living on campus, it's really like room and board really means like your dorm fee, the amount of money it costs to live in the dorms or on campus housing, and board basically means like your food. So your meal plan is what that means basically. If you're living off campus, maybe not in the freshman year, but maybe eventually if the student is living off campus, and has a landlord, you're paying rent to someone externally outside of the institution, and you're buying groceries, and maybe you have a little bit of a meal plan, but you also have groceries that you're sharing an apartment and you're living with 2 or 3 other roommates and you guys buy groceries and stuff like that. Nonetheless, either way, you have to eat and sleep when you're at school. So room and board could mean any of those things, but the college will take into account the cost of attendance when they're figuring out how much financial aid to give you. And they're going to take into account the fact that even if you're not living on campus, you're still going to have to incur the cost of eating and sleeping. So that is taken care of there in terms of the cost of attendance. It's not exact per family, it is an average. So it's not going to be like, oh, okay, so if I have 2 roommates, are they going to change my room and board versus if I have 3 roommates? No, they don't. But they are going to use an average. And then same with the books and supplies, they're going to use an average because they can't make it exact based on one student to the next. But they will use a decent average for you. And then transportation would be more like if you were going to and from school twice a year, they'll kind of use that as their transportation piece of the cost of attendance. It's not going to be like specific to you directly, where the student might want to come home every month. It typically is more basic of coming home a couple times a year. And then personal expenses would be things like, buying toothpaste and just general needs that a student would have while they're there. And so all 5 of those components add up to the cost of attendance. So those are in every cost of attendance, the college is required to use these 5 components to build that cost for you. And why is that? That's because they want to take in, well, the Department of Education dictates that they have to include those 5 components, but it also is fair to you because it means that the college is looking at all the stuff before they figure out how much financial aid you can even qualify for. In other words, they're not just looking at just tuition. They're saying, oh, okay, the family will on average have this much money they have to come up with. Now let's figure out how much we can afford to give them based on this total, not just like a piece and a part of it. Okay, the second biggest, another big thing you need to keep in mind is that you need to pay attention to financial aid deadlines that you see. So go online to the colleges that you're interested in. If I were you, I would recommend, excuse me, I would recommend building like a spreadsheet or some sort of a chart that allows you to say, okay, I'm looking at these 10 schools or these 5 schools. Here's their admissions deadline. Here's their financial aid deadline. Do they have a deadline? Like I'm looking at applying early action. What's my deadline? You can see here on the bottom of this example from Caltech that if I'm applying early action, my deadline's in December versus somebody else who's applying just in the regular pool of candidates, it would be in mid-March. So make sure that you're tracking that, like make some kind of a chart and know like, okay, do they need the FAFSA? Do they need the CSS profile? In addition to the FAFSA, do they have their own institutional application? If so, make a note of that on your chart. It doesn't have to be fancy. You can just make it on paper if you want, but I would highly recommend it because some schools have a very strict deadline, and you may bump yourself out of eligibility for certain things. And I guess in a way, it's a little bit like first come, first serve. So if you don't meet the deadline, you might be out of the running for certain things, and I would hate for you to get in that situation. So
but there was a question earlier which I answered, but we'll just repeat it here.
Yeah.
If by chance somebody asked, like, if we miss the financial aid deadline, what does that mean to my students, like their application? The college will still process your student's application, and for being accepted or not. They will just process it. If you've missed the deadline, they will process it and not consider that student for aid. Correct.
Yep. Or they may only be able to offer you like whatever's left essentially in terms of aid. So they might run out of federal work study. They might run out of certain grants that they have to offer that is their own money, like their own institutional money. They might only give you like a percentage, they might prorate it. So it's like, okay, well, if you were after the deadline by a week versus a month, you know, do they prorate how much they can afford to give you? So it's really not worth playing around with.
Right.
You really should you really just need to track these deadlines because, I mean, unless you're applying early decision to one school, it can be kind of hard to keep track of unless you make some sort of a, you know, a silly little chart. It'll make it a lot easier on you.
So Kat, there's another good question, which is, I think, be fair to address. Somebody's asking, why do schools need both the CSS profile and FAFSA? If I'm filling out the CSS profile, why do they also need the FAFSA?
Yeah, so, okay, so the FAFSA is kind of like a catch-all. That one is kind of every school is going to require it. There's a very few exceptions of schools in the country that don't participate in Title IV federal aid. So you're going to have to do the FAFSA everywhere if you want to look for any kind of need-based funding. So if you want any kind of student loans, work study, grants from the college, you're going to have to do the FAFSA regardless. The CSS profile is this tiny little subset of the 6,000 colleges. So it's like 300 colleges that want that extra data on the CSS profile application. It does ask you more. It is a little bit more. It asks you for more stuff, basically. It asks you about your home equity. It asks you for your business net worth if you, regardless of the number of employees, whereas the FAFSA only asks for your business net worth if you have over 100 employees. So it is a little bit more intrusive, but however, it's the schools that use the CSS profile are the ones that have a lot of money to spend. So they tend to be, they are mostly private institutions, but there are some public schools like University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, UNC Chapel Hill, University of Virginia. Those are actually public schools, but they have a lot of money that they can afford to spend on you, and they want to get the most data that they can get. So they ask you for the profile so that they can equitably distribute their funds to their students and have all the data that they need in front of them. So I know it's a little bit of a pain to fill out the extra form, but they tend to be the schools that have the most money to spend. So it's worth your time, basically. I mean, because I worked at 2 of those schools and we were meeting full need of the families who were applying. And like, we were giving out a lot of financial aid, even though we were asking for that separate application. We were giving out a lot of grants. So I know it's a little bit more of an effort, but it can equate to thousands and thousands of dollars. So,
and the other part of that answer is that the reason why you need to fill out FAFSA, even if you're filling out the CSS profile, is because the FAFSA is the only way that your student will be able to take out federal loans if you need to borrow. So so to access the federal loans, regardless of what school the student goes to, regardless of what your income is, everybody has to fill out the FAFSA. Then the student will have access to federal loans, and you as a parent could have access to Parent Plus loans if you decide to go that route.
Right, because the Department of Education requires, if you want a Federal Plus loan, which is the parent loan for undergraduate students, you have to fill out the FAFSA to get that loan as well. So unless you really don't want any student loans or if you don't want to be considered for anything, then you don't have to do the FAFSA. But if you just want to explore merit money through the admissions process, you wouldn't have to do the FAFSA then, but anyway, you still might be required to do it even for merit funding. So I know it's kind of, it'll probably take you about 45 minutes or sometimes less on the FAFSA to fill that out. It should be relatively quick because they actually pull in data from the IRS. So it's pulling in 2021 income from the IRS data. It's called IRS data retrieval. So you don't actually have to sit there with your tax returns to fill it out. So it's relatively easy these days. But you do have to have your asset information handy, and also your untaxed income that doesn't show up on the tax return. You have to have that handy. That would be things like how how much did you put back in 2021 for your retirement, that type of thing, like your 401k or whatever, IRA, stuff like that. So, but I'd say about 45 minutes is on average about the time for the FAFSA, and the CSS profile takes, it could take, it depends on how much you've prepared to fill it out, but it could take anywhere from 45 minutes to a couple hours if you kind of take it slowly, and if you have multiple properties, and if you have a home and you have a business and those sorts of things, it does take a little bit longer to fill it out. Okay, I'll move along here. So I've said, I think, all of these items, so I just double check here. So you got the FAFSA as one application that's pretty much required by everybody. If you want any kind of aid, the CSS profile is just that subset of 300 schools or so. And then the institutional application is only used by some colleges. It's typically free, and it's usually schools that they don't use the CSS profile, but they still want a little bit of extra stuff. Like, for example, like if they have their own, a lot of times there are donors, people who want to donate money to students, and they have like certain scholarships that say, I'll give you an example, like, you had a donor, let's say a donor from Michigan who wants to give money to Michigan State, where maybe they went to college, and they specifically say, we want to give, we want to give $1,000 scholarships to students who are from the state of Michigan, from the town of Deerfield, So the colleges sometimes are like, okay, we might have certain things that we have to figure out how to spend the donor funding. And so institutional applications really help with that. So they might be asking you for kind of like a little bit of information on an institutional application, but they don't want to ask for everything that's on the CSS profile. So you might see that from time to time as well. Okay, so on the profile, you will have to provide, and actually the FAFSA too, you provide information for the parents, the students, both income and assets. So pretty much the FAFSA and the profile need information regarding the parents, regarding the student, and it's going to be income and assets. So the income is going to be taxable and untaxed income. So it's going to be like, what did I put back in what did I say for my IRA this year would be considered untaxed income. It's not taxable on your 1040, let's say. Also untaxed income could be things like untaxed interest income, untaxed dividend income. It could be earned income credit. There's a lot of different types of things that fall into that. But that is a requirement that you have to list untaxed income and taxable income on your CSS profile, and quite frankly, on the FAFSA as well. The assets are things like cash savings, investments, which would be like, like if you have CDs or money market accounts or things like that. Business net worth is going to be, what is the value of your business? What is the debt against it? And you subtract the debt from the value to get what your net worth is. So if you were to sell your business today, what would it be worth? And then you subtract the debt against it to come up with how much you're actually reporting on the form. As I said before, if the FAFSA requires that only if you have 100 employees or more, the CSS profile requires it regardless of how many employees you have. Real estate goes on both forms, the FAFSA and the profile. But for the profile, you have to also include your home. So they want to know your home value minus the debt equals the equity. Kind of the same as with the business there. Value minus debt equals equity. And then if you have a farm, I didn't put that on here, but if you have a farm, that also comes into play as well. If you have the value of the farm, the debt against the farm, and so on. 529 college savings plans are offered, are reported on under the parent assets. for any parent who has a 529 plan in their name, for the student who's applying to college, and also for any other siblings. Does not go under the student's name on the application. It's definitely going under the parent's name, which is actually better for you because the treatment of the assets for the parent is not as aggressive as it is for the student. So the fact that the 529 college savings plans go under the parent assets is actually a good thing for you. It means that the the calculation doesn't peel as much out of there for your family contribution. If it's under the parent assets, it doesn't take as much. Retirement value. Okay, now this confuses people sometimes because it's like, well, why are they asking me for my retirement value? So the CSS profile asks you, how much have you saved in retirement for the duration of your life? So if you've saved $100,000 or $1 million, it's a question on the form, just on the CSS profile. It is not in the calculation, but it is a field on the CSS profile that you will see. I believe you can still leave it blank, as I understand it from my College Board colleagues. And but if you do put it down, just know that it is not in the calculation, but it is more of an FYI for the college they'll see the information, but it doesn't go into the calculation of your need, what your family contribution is. And then the number in family, the number in the college, that goes on both forms, profile and FAFSA. But how many people are living within your household that you're providing greater than half support to those people? For example, they're eating and they're sleeping in your house. That would be included in the number in family, and the number in college is more or less self-explanatory, but it's kind of like they have to be at least half-time status.
Kat, before you go on, there were like a few questions about valuing, home equity. So somebody's saying, if I have an apartment, do I need to get the apartment appraised? And somebody else is commenting that the prices on Zillow are usually on the high side. So how do you really use that for home value?
So you just have to use your best judgment, to be honest.
They're not really checking up on each person's, estimate,
No. However, so there are some colleges that are a little bit more in the weeds and they're very detailed about their review. I have worked at those types of schools myself, and we were using Zillow, where we look at the, kind of a rough idea of where that, the value of the home. But to be honest with you, colleges don't have that much time to go and check everyone's report to see, oh, okay, let's double check this and see if it was, within $5,000. Nope, they're not going to do that. Just you use the purpose of the form is just to be honest. If you feel like, okay, if I sold my house today, I know that my neighbors sold their house, it's right there. It's you don't have to go get it appraised or anything. It's more or less like in my neighborhood where I live or whatnot, what would this likely be worth today if I went to sell it? And you don't have to go on Zillow and take it from that site, because I agree, it's not always going to be accurate. 100, for sure, it's not going to be 100% accurate. And an appraisal, then you have to pay to get it appraised, and I wouldn't really do that either. I would say just use your best guess based on the market today. I mean, the last couple of years have been crazy with the home values. So, the assets section is meant to be, what are your assets worth today? Like when you're filling this form out, it's not like you just have to use your best guess on it. You don't really have to go paying to get an appraisal or something like that. I wouldn't tell you to do that. So I don't know if that helps, but I mean, I know.
No, I think it does. It's just, people should be honest, try as best they can to estimate, but they don't have to be, this isn't a perfect science, and nobody's gonna
No.
come back and say, you were off by, $3,567,
No, but what they might do is, if you are, if they're looking at your form because you're appealing for more financial aid or something like that, they may scrutinize it more because they might look and see, if your home if it is on Zillow as $1 million and you reported $150,000,
Right.
well, that's a different story, because then they're like, well, wait a minute, that doesn't seem to coincide with the neighborhood in which you live. And so, but I wouldn't really worry about it like to the dollar, because here's why. One, they're not gonna, you just have to be honest, and they're not gonna be looking it up for exact dollar amounts. And also, keep in mind that the asset section of the forms are fractionalized. So in terms of how much money the colleges calculate in terms of how much you can afford to pay, the asset section means less than the income. So it tends to be, of your total assets, what is the amount that you would typically what would typically spit out on the other end in terms of how much you have to you're expected to contribute? It's probably going to be like 3 to 5% of your assets, as opposed to the income, which is broken down in lots of different ways. But the percentage that comes from income is actually higher, much higher than the asset section. So, and I'm talking about the parents' asset section. So 3 to 5%, like if you're off by $10,000 on a home equity, or 5,000, I mean, it's not going to really matter that much in the end. Like, just do your best to guess it. I'm saying guess, but do your best to report it, I should say. I also should tell you here too, and I know I tend to ramble during these types of webinars because there's just so much information and I'm trying to be helpful. The student assets are treated much more heavily than the parent assets. So remember, I just said the parent assets, it's about 3 to 5% of the parent assets that come out of the CSS profile calculation from assets. So what is my contribution from assets? It's about 3 to 5%, give or take. The student assets, on the other hand, it's 25%. So if the student has saved money, if you've saved money for the student, or the student has saved money, or they have a trust that's in their name and it's in the student assets, it's going to pull out 25% for their first year in college as part of the calculation. So it's super different than the parents in terms of the contribution from assets. So I just want you to be aware of that as well, which is why I said before that the 529 college savings plans, it's good that it's in the parents, because otherwise it would be treated much more heavily than if it's in the parent asset section.
Okay, so 2 more quick questions about the CSS profile. This one question relates back to business owners. Somebody is asking if they have multiple LLCs, each of which does not have more than 100 employees, but potentially all of them together might have more than 100 employees. I guess actually this is really a question for, FAFSA, now that I think about it.
Yeah.
How do they, will they have to report it if all together, each, if you add the employees from multiple LLCs?
Well, that is a good question. If I were you, here's what I would do. So go online, go to, all you have to do is just Google FAFSA 2324, and you can do, you're seeing my screen, I think. You can just look at the PDF of the FAFSA, because you can't do this for the profile, but you can for the FAFSA. So this is, whoopsie, sorry. And all you have to do is like go to the instruction page. There's instruction pages on here, and you can double check that answer. I don't know, but for the sake of time here, I just wanted to at least show you that this is the FAFSA. And so when it talks about the business, let's see here, business value, value of a small business, family owns and controls more than 50% and has 100 or fewer employees for small business.
Yeah, I don't know if that answers it. Still, it's an interesting question.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. You're gonna have to put it on the CSS profile regardless. So if you are applying to any schools that need that form, you'll definitely have to put all your businesses on there. And all of your real estate too.
I
But
guess they could call, I mean, there is a helpline for FAFSA.
yeah,
And maybe call a financial aid office at a school to ask.
right. I mean, it almost, I don't know. To me, the way that this reads is, each business has fewer than 100 employees, so I'm not sure if you would have to put it on there. But, I don't know. I don't want to be, I guess you could probably do like, I think they have online chat.
Yeah.
And all you have to do is go to this website here, which is studentaid.gov. And you can dig a little bit more in there under the FAFSA form section and how to fill out the FAFSA form and maybe see if you can get your answer there. So again, studentaid.gov.
So there was another question, which I was waiting for it to come up just because it normally does, and it's a fair one, is how do the schools and these forms take into account any cost of living? The idea that one family might earn a certain amount and live in a very high cost city like Manhattan or any place on the East Coast versus somebody who might be, from a much lower cost location.
Okay, so the FAFSA takes into account minorly, very minor, in the sense that they know what state you're from. But that's not really helpful because I mean,
there's a big range, even in New York.
Yeah, so I was living in Rochester, New York, and certainly didn't cost me as much as Manhattan, New York. So the good news is the CSS profile, this is where the CSS profile actually helps you, because there's the cost of living adjustment factor is actually built in there. So based on your zip code, some colleges are actually who use the CSS profile can hone in on that, and it's driven by the zip code that you're in, and they're actually giving you more leeway within the formula, and it's kind of giving you like extra allowances based on the fact that it costs you more to live in Manhattan, New York than Manhattan, Kansas, which is actually a place. So the FAFSA doesn't really help you much with that, but the CSS profile does. So if you're only applying to schools that need the FAFSA, they're not really going to take that into account, really. It's only going to be driven on state. And that's not really super helpful when you're coming from, like I said, Manhattan, New York versus Kansas. So what I would say is, if it is a CSS profile school, they're probably helping you a little bit more than the FAFSA only schools on that particular topic, but you could always appeal and provide special circumstances based on your actual, like, certain things that, you can talk it through with the financial aid office there and say, okay, I'm living in San Francisco and here's my, this is what it cost me for rent. And maybe they can do some sort of allowances that are on a case-by-case basis for you. But again, if that's just like, if it's a FAFSA only school, like if it's a FAFSA only school, they don't need another form. That's where you really have the concern of bringing it up. So
there's another question, and question came earlier. Just like on the FAFSA, you fill it out, you do almost immediately see what your EFC is if you're paying close attention and don't rush off the screen too quickly. You'll see, you'll see the 00, whatever the numbers are of your EFC.
yeah.
But when you do the but when you do the CSS profile, I mean, I know the answer, but I'll let you answer. Do they give you the same type of, do they tell you what your EFC is from the CSS profile?
No.
I know.
So I know Debbie could probably present this on her own because she's been hearing me so much. So if you're doing the profile or an institutional application, you will not see an EFC on that. which is what I have on the bottom of this slide here. The FAFSA spits it out to you. You can see where I've circled that there as an example. But that EFC says $1,702 basically. But the other two forms don't. And that's just because it's not public information. But the truth of the matter is the EFC that you see on the FAFSA there it's not 100% helpful, because quite frankly, you're never going to pay that exact dollar amount to the school. It's really like an indicator of how much federal Pell Grant you can get. And like, it's really tied more to the Title IV federal financial aid in terms of like making sure that you're in the right box of, okay, I get this much Pell, I get this much for subsidized, student loans, that type of thing. But it doesn't mean that this family was going to pay $1,702 to the college. It's really not meant to be that precise. It's more of a Pell indicator kind of. So I wouldn't panic that you don't see an EFC on the CSS profile in institutional application. You are more than welcome to ask the school to give you kind of an idea of what that calculated to. But it won't be printed on anything per se, unless they happen to print it on their, when they give you a financial aid award, they will either have it online for you or they'll give you, they'll send you a letter, probably both maybe, or at least it'll be online these days. So they might indicate on there kind of what that number is roughly, but they also might not exactly tell you. So I know that sounds very squishy, but that's kind of how it is. So the FAFSA shows it to you, the other forms don't. But in the end, your family contribution is going to be this. It's going to be cost minus family contribution that they calculated through the form or both forms, and that equals your need. And then the schools will, they'll basically provide you as much as they can out of the financial need that they calculated through either the FAFSA, CSS profile, or both. So this was sort of an example of that, as I'm rolling along here, of, okay, if my need is, okay, my cost at school X is $75,000. My calculated family contribution was $35,000. I'm just trying to make these clean numbers here. Calculated need is 40. 75 minus 35 is 40. So the school may provide you need-based aid that is equal to or less than 40. It just depends on how much money that college or university has to spend. But you might see a gap. So the bottom half of this slide shows you what that means if you have a gap, because not every college can afford to meet your need 100%. I happen to work at a couple of schools that pretty much did. They met, pretty much full need almost. So, but not every college can afford to do that. So in this example, again, we've got cost of $75,000. The actual amount of financial aid they gave you was $25,000, even though my need was 40 up above. So now what am I actually being asked to pay? I'm not being asked to pay $35,000. I'm actually being asked to pay $50,000. And so that's considered what we call, in my lingo, in my world, the gap. So it's like, okay, what is my gap? What do I really need to afford to pay? And that gap is how much you're going to have to come up with in terms of like from your income, from your assets, and from borrowing. Because those are kind of the three main ways to pay: from income, assets, or borrowing. So hopefully you're looking at a situation where they're able to meet your need. And if they were, in this case, you would have received close to $40,000 of grants, scholarships, loans, and work study. So hopefully you'll be in that situation more so than having a bigger gap shown to you. Any questions, Debbie?
Just a few questions about your EFC and if you feel that it could impact merit money.
Oh, okay. So colleges, so when you apply for admissions to the college, or university, they receive an admissions application. It's not the financial aid application. It's through the common application or some other means to receive your admissions, application to see whether you'd be admitted. Some colleges completely don't care. They will look at your admissions stuff separately, has no relationship at all to the financial aid application, whether or not you're applying. There are, however, some schools that might want to know that you're applying for financial aid when they determine if you're admitted or not. Sorry, I keep having to drink water. But I would say for the most part, schools kind of keep that stuff separate. So the EFC, just because your EFC is, your family contribution comes out, let's say your EFC came out as a low number, like, okay, my family can only afford to pay $5,000, whereas family B can afford to pay $40,000. Does that mean that they're going to admit the person that won't cost them as much money because you can afford $40,000? That is not necessarily the case. Some schools are need blind, it's called, where they're just mutually exclusive. They're not looking at your ability to pay when they're trying to admit the student from an academic standpoint and a talent standpoint and figure out if the student is a good fit for their school. So I think in general, I think the colleges often will keep them separate for the most part. So there are.
I agree with you. I don't think that they don't have that much time, but they're not, they're not, looking at your financial information on your financial aid forms and kind of using that to influence whether your student got merit. I think in the cases where, and I wrote this in the chat, colleges are asking for families to fill out the FAFSA to, if the student wants merit. It's not that they're going to use that information to determine merit. They just want to make sure that if you were eligible for any need-based aid, that they know that and they can give you the need-based aid, as they're also looking at merit money.
Right. I mean, in the end, they're trying to build a class of students in the, a cohort. They're trying to build a cohort, and that is based on how vigorous their academic programs are. Like, okay, are you going to fit in well with us academically? Are you going to fit in well with us socially? And it's not all about financial to them. I mean, you know what I mean? It's not all financial to you, and it's not all financial to them. So they're trying to build a class of students who will fit well within their university and succeed as well.
Okay.
Okay, let's see, Debbie. I'm all over the map here a little bit on some of these, but I've talked about that quite a bit. Talked about that too. Do you want me to go through this a little bit, or I know we're late, but we're
Well, what else do you have after this slide?
This is the special circumstances.
Maybe I think you can touch on that.
Okay, because this is basically, I've already mentioned some of the special circumstances you might have as a family. So, 2021 was a while ago. So by the time the student goes to school, it's 2023. For those of you who are seniors. So a lot could have happened in between. So they're using 2021 income for next fall, but you might have you might have other things that you want to tell them about. So job loss, pay reduction, medical expenses, elderly grandparent care, K-12 tuition. I mentioned this before, but just to make sure that you have, I guess I just want you to have the comfort of knowing that financial aid offices are used to working with families on these things. So don't be embarrassed about reporting any of it. You're an individual family reporting stuff, and sometimes what's on the FAFSA or the profile doesn't tell the whole story, so Just make sure that if the school is, just make sure the school knows it. Because if they only require the FAFSA, you won't have a space, like I said, to put that on there. So you'll have to write them a letter or send an email or just get the process going. You could do it before you know about admission status and whether the student's been admitted or not. But if I were you, I would probably do it a little bit later, maybe closer to either once you've heard about the financial aid and how much they're able to offer you, or maybe like, you know, closer to the time that you're going to hear about admission. Because if you're not admitted to the school, there's, you know, you're making an extra effort on something that won't matter. So you could probably wait until after your financial aid initial offer is determined, and then you could communicate at that point. Consumer debt is typically not considered, although if you do have an extreme circumstance, they might be able to do something, but on average, it's not really kind of part of it. But it doesn't mean it wouldn't be taken into account if you appealed with special circumstances, but I just wanted to kind of caution you that it's not part of it initially anyway. And it's not always taken into account, but you never know. You can always tell your special story and they'll review it for you. And then this is called an appeal. So if you are kind of trying to do this, you're technically appealing the financial aid that you were originally offered, and you're trying to appeal for additional financial aid. So that's what that means. So they will have an appeal process. That's kind of the lingo they'll be using. I didn't talk about this. So if you have, this is like a, you know, this is a big story in and of itself, but if you do have if you are in a household where there is a not, you know, it's a divorce, separated, or never married situation, just know again that it's the parent who is on the FAFSA and the CSS profile will be the parent normally who the student lives with. But it's certainly it's the parent who's providing greater than half of the support for the student. So it's usually the one that they're living with because they're eating and sleeping in that household. But there are a lot of families who have joint custody where it's literally like half and half. And you kind of have to go with, you have to kind of make a choice because one parent has to be chosen for the FAFSA and the profile. In terms of who you're going to put on there. So if it really is 50-50, you're just going to have to kind of go with the majority rule on that, I guess.
So what if you're in a non-traditional, it's not even necessarily non-traditional, but what if you're in a family situation where the parent, the mother is never got married, and is single by choice, not divorced, not widowed, you know, but is a single parent? How do they identify that?
Okay, well, that's easy for the FAFSA because it's just the single parent is applying on the FAFSA, and then you don't have to worry about anything else. But on the CSS profile, if it is one of those schools that I mentioned over here that might need the non-custodial parent to fill it out, like I'm showing you now, you will need to fill out a waiver request form for waiving that. So if you go to the CSS profile website right here, you can go to divorced or separated families down here on the right and click on learn more. And then in here, you will see what's called a CSS profile waiver request for the non-custodial parent. So in that example, it's a single parent, you know, maybe they have no idea where the other biological parent is because maybe that was 18 years ago. I mean, quite frankly.
Well, honestly, it could have been a sperm donor too.
It could have been a sperm donor. So we had that when I used to work at Syracuse, for example. I mean, we had families who completed a waiver request for that CSS profile form to be filled out. And there were those examples where it was sperm donor or, you know, hey, I don't know where it was was a pregnancy during high school, and, I have no idea where that person is. And so they would fill out a waiver request, and this is the one that you can use if you'd like. Some colleges have their own, but the College Board does provide you with the sample that you can use, and you can fill this out and turn it into all the different schools that require the form, which again would be right here on this this list of colleges under the one I'm highlighting in blue here. So I would recommend, if that is your situation, you might as well go ahead and fill this in if you know that some of the colleges are going to need it, and you might as well disseminate that to them sooner than later.
Somebody's asking, and actually another family messaged me this week with the same question. It is a divorced family. Both parents are remarried. The student lives with, I think it was in the mother and the stepfather, and the family that she lives with, the custodial family, is refusing to do any of these forms. But the non-custodial family is willing to do the forms, but they can't get the custodial family to start any of the forms. What do you do in that case?
Yikes.
Yeah, that's what
unfortunate. Yeah. That's unfortunate because the student's kind of stuck in the middle. And if it truly is that the custodial family parent, if that's where they're living and they get more than half their support from that person, that's really a showstopper because they can't even get the FAFSA filled out.
I know.
So in that case, I would probably speak individually to each financial aid office that you're applying to. Another reason not, this is where having like a list of 20 schools can take so much time because you really have to do a lot of outreach when it's that kind of thing. So the more schools you have, the more you got to tell your story to. What you could do is wait until you know if you've been accepted or not. And
then appeal.
And then appeal. But the problem is on that one is they can't even meet the deadlines that the school has because that family's not willing to fill out the forms.
Mm-hmm.
So I think in that example, I would call them earlier because you're not going to meet your deadline. You're not going to meet the deadline of the school because the custodial family doesn't, if they don't fill it out, that student's not going to have their application in on time for financial aid. So I guess that's what I would say. I would contact the financial aid offices at the schools that you're applying to before the deadline of financial aid and tell them the story. And it has to be the student telling the story because of FERPA laws. Like you can't talk like the non-custodial parent could ask the question.
But honestly, it might even be more compelling if it came from the student anyhow, because unfortunately, as you said, the student is the one that's being squeezed in the middle.
A little bit. Yeah. I mean, I know believe me, I've heard all the situations over the years. And so I understand, we had this as well. And, I think it's a case-by-case basis for each school, and they might handle it differently. One school might handle it differently than another. They have, excuse me, the ability to use what's called professional judgment, and it's individual to this college, how they might handle it. So College A might do something different than College B.
Right. So the professional judgment means that the I guess the director of financial aid, the head of financial aid, can choose to override, any thing that the government might tell them, they have to do, because of professional judgment that they feel it's necessary. They can change somebody's EFC. They can make these type of decisions. But as Kat said, it's going to be case by case and school by school.
Yes, and it isn't just the director. It'll be any of the professional staff that you're speaking with. But they have to they have to decide what they are willing to do based on their own funding too. Like if they don't have the funds to kind of make up for that, if it's a certain circumstance, then they may not do You know what I mean? So it's all very individual to the colleges, but I would make a phone call or get that going sooner than later. When the student should.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. So
Okay.
I'm sure
So,
they'll work through it somehow, but starting early is key on that one.
Kat, it is getting a little late. Somebody did ask, so maybe this will be like this will be the finale. Somebody wanted to know if you could go back to the slide that we skipped, which was the scenarios.
Yes. Yeah. Mhm. So basically, I prepared this because I think it's good to know that, sometimes I've had families say, well, my neighbor, we have very similar, income, and we have similar homes and all this stuff. And, we have, like, why is it that my child got so much less than they did or whatever? So not everything is as it seems. So, so the way that the formula works is it looks at income, it looks at assets, it looks at the number in family, number in college, and it provides lots of different allowances within the formula based on those items. It also looks at, federal tax, how much are you paying in federal taxes versus state taxes versus other taxes versus medical expenses and all these things. So there's all this stuff that goes into the formulas. But I thought it would be helpful to compare, like, okay, scenarios 1, 2, and 3, you can see in the green that they have the same income, same assets, but where it differs is the number in family and the number in college. So scenario 1 has 6 people in the family. And what does that really mean? That means that you have to feed 6 people as opposed to scenario 2, where you're only feeding 3 people. So that means that you get more allowances in your calculation if you're the family of 6 versus 3, because it doesn't cost you as much to feed 3 people versus 6. I mean, I don't mean to break it down. So that's really what it means. So within the formula, it's giving you more allowances if you have a larger size family. And then with scenario 3, again, income and assets being equal, now I've got 2 in college versus, I've got 6 people in the family, but I got 2 in college. So how does that affect me? So if we look over to the right, we're using the same cost of attendance for the examples in 1, 2, and 3, $75,000 school. The EFC, or the expected family contribution, is going to come out lower for the bigger size family than scenario 2 with the family size of 3. And then in scenario 3, now I got 2 in college, so it's going to break that EFC down even more. So based on that, remember I showed you here, the formula is cost minus EFC equals financial need. So what does that mean? Cost minus EFC in scenario 1 is 53,000 is the result. That means I need $53,000 with my calculations, versus the smaller size family, they need a little bit less because the way the allowances work in the formula, they don't get as many allowances as the bigger family. And then in scenario 3, that family needs even more than family 1 because they've got 2 in college at the same time, going at least half time. So those 3, that's an example. I did, that's 1, 2, and 3. And then similarly, if you look at 7 and 8, same income, same assets, but you've got like a smaller cost of attendance. You can kind of see here where, let me go to scenario 8. Let's call this a 4-year public in your state versus a 4-year private in scenario 1. My cost is only 25,000. So if my EFC is the same as scenario 1 that it is in 8, now all of a sudden I only need $3,000 because my cost minus my EFC is only $3,000 versus scenario 1 that maybe is a high cost private school. I need $53,000. And so if the school meets your need, you may end up finding that the private school in scenario 1 is a better deal than scenario 8. So you just never know until you apply. So this is kind of how need-based financial aid works. This is right here how it works. It's just more high level, but it's not exact, but I have my little note on the right there. It's not exact, but it's giving you a good idea of, okay, this is kind of how it works. And that's why sticker price isn't always as it seems, because it doesn't really matter until the end of the day when you know what your financial aid is. So,
Right. So it's really, I mean, honestly, whether it's need-based aid or even, if students are getting merit, at the end of the day, it's your net cost that is what matters. So it is whatever the starting price is and the cost of attendance, and that's going to vary depending on four-year private school, four-year public school, in-state public school, out-of-state public school. So you start your starting point, which is this, cost of attendance, minus whatever you've been given, whether it's need-based aid or merit, is your net. And so that's the final cost. That's the final number that's going to matter.
correct. Yeah. Which the net price calculators I talked about earlier can help you with, but the rubber meets the road when you actually fill out the applications and you get a financial aid award from the schools. That's really, and net price calculator is a good estimate, but it's just a practice. This, doing the forms and everything, that's where you got to make the decisions, kind of like, before May 1st and that type of thing, for next year. And see what's affordable for you. You're really looking at social fit, academic fit, and then at that point, you're looking for financial fit because you have all your information at the kitchen table where you're sitting and trying to make a decision, as to what you're going to do as a family. So.
Well, Kat, as always, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. I think we answered a lot of questions by going through the slides, and I tried to answer as many as I could in chat. And
thank you.
Thank you for coming tonight with all your knowledge, and I am wishing everybody out there the best of luck in filling out these forms. The one thing you walk away with tonight is know the deadlines. I hate hearing when people miss the deadline and they, miss an opportunity for getting money. So go and check all those deadlines right now.
Yep. Good advice. Oh, thank you so much and good luck to you all.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Good night.